Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Sparrow, along with hosts Ed and Lorraine Warren. Tonight, we have two different tapes to show you. The first tape is one that Ed had taken of a monastery in Monroe, not far from Ed's house, I'd say about 2 or 3 miles. And there's a gentleman on there that had an experience. His name is Charles Hayden. Now, he's about a 47-year-old man. And he will relate to you what happened to him when he was about 22?
Yeah, he was 22 years old, Tony, at the time. But the point of this whole thing is that this monastery is right in between Union Graveyard and Stepney Graveyard off Route 59, which is very haunted. And the young man, he was a young man then, 22 years old, when he had an experience which I think was incredible. And he's going to be relating that, so I won't spoil it now.
Okay, all right.
So the monastery that I'm talking about now never really was completed, you know. It looks sort of like the ruins of an old castle.
You've been
and
there,
it had
Tony.
an aura of disaster about it right from the very day that it was consecrated and so forth. Today, I do know for a fact that people go up there and they do practice satanic rituals because we've seen the evidence of that all over the place. There's candle wax, there's different kinds of satanic symbols that are drawn all over the walls and so forth. But it's an incredible sight to see because we're going to England, and what it reminds me of is the ruins of an old castle or an abbey or a monastery. And people like Lorraine going up there, she can feel the vibrations immediately of what's in and around that place, and it's not good.
Not good.
The thing is now, Tony, and I'm happy about this, is that it's protected. You can no longer get up there. You know, you'd really be trespassing now.
What's there to stop
Well,
you?
it's the land, part of the land has been developed. It's all fenced off.
Oh.
New owners own the property in the front. So you really
that's
can, it's good. It's protecting this old building.
We have to say that there are no trespassing signs up there, so
Oh,
you know,
good.
if anybody's to go up there,
So-
they might get themselves in trouble.
But see,
We're not advocating that anyone go there.
oh no, but see, the people who had gone there, Tony, they were attracted to it because it's consecrated ground.
Well,
And-
let's take a look at this.
Well, why don't we do that then?
amazing.
Why don't we look at the first tape of the monastery with Charles Hayden, a local resident who had an experience. If we could show that video now.
And we hear those kind of stories every week from the people in Monroe, Newtown, Easton.
Okay. Yeah. And Charlie, you said was about 20.
Happened here. A Greek Orthodox monastery was to be built. Just a stone's throw away from the Union Cemetery and our own home. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were poured into this project. The ground was consecrated and blessed. Yet, everything failed. It had an aura of disaster about it. Cursed? There are those that say it was cursed. And today, satanic activities do take place here as an insult to God himself. God that will be heard in the ruins of these foundations, where there will be satanic activities. Charlie, could you give me your full name, please?
My name is Charlie Hayden.
How old are you, Charlie?
I am 46.
And what's your address?
285 Raven Terrace, Stratford, Connecticut.
And your phone number?
386-0302.
Now, Charlie, we're going back a few years. How old were you at the time of the incident that occurred? You were pretty young then.
Oh, I was about 20.
About 20 years old?
No, I was older than that. I was about 22.
And you had an incident occur not too far away from the Union Cemetery. You were with a girlfriend one night. Tell me about that.
Oh, we're about 5 miles away, probably about 4 miles from where I live. It's actually a adjoining neighbor. It was a farm. You know, I grew up on a farm and everything. I knew a little bit about the cemetery.
But it's not very far from the Union Cemetery, though.
No, it's about, 5 miles. We, at this particular time, there was no houses or anything around up there on the top of this, well, you could say it was a so-called half a mountain or whatever. But it was like open fields, corn. This was a particular place, it was a cornfield. And a lot of kids at that particular time used to pull into the place, and it was a place they used to go parking. Well, the farmer had planted corn in his field, and it was only not quite up knee-high, and there was a tractor parked in the middle of the cornfield. And we used to pull around on the outside of the cornfield with the cars. You could drive all the way around our perimeter. And the tractor was right on top of the hill. At that particular time, it was moon was out that night, and it was a rough sky. It was like a storm coming up. And we were parked in a car, and it was quiet. And probably at least an hour or so. And all of a sudden, there was like this noise, just out of nowhere. It just started right up. There was nobody around this tractor. There's no way that they could hide around it in any way whatsoever. It was a tractor that...
What happened with the tractor?
The engine on this tractor started.
It just started up. There's nobody else around it.
Just started up. There's nobody around it. There's no way that anybody could have jumped on this tractor and started it with a key, because it was not a tractor that had a battery and a key in it. This tractor had to be cranked.
So you would have seen anybody that was over there cranking.
That's right.
And so it just started up, what you're saying, by itself.
It had to. I mean, it's just something. It's like, at that particular time, something I would even believe.
Now, what did you do when that happened?
We sat there, we looked out the windshield, and she looked at me, I looked at her, and it's like, we looked at each other like saying, well, geez, I don't believe it. Do you believe it? I don't know what I'm seeing. Seeing and hearing,
Did you go over to the tractor?
We did after a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I got out of the car, started walking towards it, about halfway to it, and the tractor was still running. And at that time, the tractor had just totally stopped.
Just totally stopped?
Just totally stopped. As closer we got to it, it stopped.
What do you think happened, Charlie?
I really don't know. I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Charlie.
Wow, that was something, huh?
That's the kind of stories we hear every week and have heard for 35 years since we moved into Monroe. People come to us and say, I'm going down Barn Hill Road, and here's this man standing on a little bridge,
yes.
and all of a sudden he disappears. I'm going along Route 59, there's a woman there with a small child. I stop the car and they both disappear. These are the kind of stories that we get around Easton, Monroe, Newtown.
Yeah.
Now, the second tape, I understand, is going to be about haunted England and Scotland. You'll have on there, if I understand this correctly, the Brown Lady of Rainham Hall. You'll have Glamis Castle, which I understand and know from being there is one of the most haunted castles in all of Scotland. Also, you'll have a place that I'm very intrigued by, Whitby Abbey.
Whitby Abbey, right.
Where I also had an experience, but I think we talked about that once before. I don't even like to talk about it. But I've been there several times. You've been there dozens of times. And Ed, what else is on that tape?
Cursed chair, you can't forget that one.
The cursed chair, where I had an incident in there too.
Right, for sure.
And you did too.
Yes.
And Lorraine, that was really wild.
But I think we should get right into it so they can see the whole thing.
That tape on if we can, Rob.
In the lonely mansion house, owned by Lord Townsend. There have been many who have seen her. In 1937, a professional photographer was commissioned by Lord Townsend, the owner, to take pictures of his great manor house, inside and out. I guess for insurance reasons. His name was Captain Provan. As he was going about his work, he had just set up his camera, when, to his great surprise, he found he was not alone. For there, coming down the grand staircase, was the specter of Dorothy Walpole, as she was called in life. He was not about to lose this opportunity of getting a picture of a truly bona fide apparition. Lucky for him and us, the flash of the bulb was not as bright as they are today. I decided to investigate this ghostly lady the first time we went to England. I did not think I should forewarn Lord Townsend of our plans to visit him, as I felt I would have a better chance of entering the hallowed halls of Raynham by talking to him in person. As we drove down the long driveway, I started to have some misgivings about my decision, as there were just too many no trespassing signs. But as soon as we stopped in front of the great house, I had a brilliant idea. I would send Lorraine up to the door. I always send Lorraine up first, so she will feel useful, you understand. Plus the fact that she was less likely to get thrown off the property than I was. But when the housekeeper answered the door, the news was not good. Lord Townsend was in the south of France on holiday, or vacation to you Americans, and would not be back for 2 weeks. As I stood by our car, I realized I was looking at the church and the graveyard that Dorothy Walpole had been buried in. So we decided to go down and have a look at the gravesite. Lorraine, as a clairvoyant, felt she should walk down the road to the church, the very road the brown lady had walked numerous times during her tragic lifetime. She is said was starved physically to death by her husband, the Viscount Townsend. Tragedies create the ghost syndrome. Thus we have this haunting occurring over hundreds of years. She immediately picked up the presence of the brown lady. As I walked around the ancient graveyard, I suddenly had an urge to look at the map of England. My eyes were drawn to a small fishing village on the east coast called Cromer. It was about 60 miles from where we were. I had heard of it when I was in the Navy in World War II, mostly about how English fishermen saved the lives of both English and American pilots whose planes were shot down and wound up in the cold North Sea. Well, we arrived about 7 o'clock at night. The village was as quaint as I thought it would be. High cliffs, quaint homes. So we decided that we would then have a nice English fish dinner. But while in the restaurant, we had met an English couple. And of course they were curious about why the Americans were in that part of England at that time of year, which was early for tourists. We explained to them about what had occurred at Raynham Hall, and of course my disappointment. The gentleman looked at me very surprised, and he said, "Hold on 1 second, I'll be right back." Well, he went into the part of the restaurant, which is the pub, and in about 10 minutes he came out, and with him was a young man and a young woman, both very nice people, who he introduced as Sir Christopher White and Lady White, Baron and Baroness of Raynham Hall. Well, of course, it was hard for me to accept this. Here we were in a strange village none of us had ever been to before. We were trying to get into Raynham Hall. On just some kind of a hunch, I decided to pick out this little village on the east coast of England. We go into a restaurant, and who's there? The Baron of Raynham Hall. Well, the man was very helpful. He was very courteous. In fact, he had invited us back to his own manor house, which was in Cromer. And he gave us numerous items to take back with us on the television show, which we would be having when we arrived back in New York, including numerous photographs of his mother and father when they were being married on the steps of Raynham there. And of course, the credentials which I needed to prove that one brown lady of Raynham Hall actually was seen by family members, his own experiences as a boy at the Great Hall. So our trip turned out to be a great success. Well, what you're looking at here is called the most haunted castle in all of Scotland, Glamis Castle. And well, it should be, for the many ghosts that roam its lonely halls. Lady Glamis, it is said, was burnt to death about 400 years ago for witchcraft. I don't believe that this beautiful woman actually was performing witchcraft arts. But in those days, you were accused of witchcraft for any reason, and you were burnt at the stake in Edinburgh. But her ghostly apparition has appeared many times at Glamis, especially in the chapel of the castle itself. But in the crypt are heard many times the arguments between the two lords who had fought to the death. And in the lonely passageways, a young boy is often seen wandering its lonely halls. Not only there, but also in the huge dining room. How would you like to be confined in a contraption like this? Well, many people were in the medieval days in those castles that hold too many dark secrets. Imagine being confined. It's not like in the movies where someone comes and saves you in the end. No, your only thought is escape. But you can't escape. Not from something like this. But yet, many did. How? With the astral body. In their great desire, they actually left that physical body with the astral body. But the unfortunate thing is that once the silver cord, as they call it, breaks, that connects from the astral to the physical body, then of course death takes place to that physical body. And that person might remain in what we refer to as an earthbound spirit. Even though the earthbound spirit will go to a loved one, try to communicate with that loved one. Many times they cannot. So they wander in their great despair, sometimes for many, many years. They are confused. They are not what we call with it, simply because of the torturing that took place in the beginning. If they died in a mental state, this is the way they will remain for some time. In 1896, Lord Combermere had been in a terrible accident in which he died, and on the day of his burial, a psychic was in his library and had seen the ghostly form of Lord Combermere. Of course, this was caught visually. Not everyone could see such an apparition the same way. Well, cameras were set up and pictures were taken, and here you see the end result. In the chair, well, let's go up a little closer here. In this chair, you can see the head, the shoulder, and the arm very clearly of Lord Combermere in his favorite chair. And this actually took place at the moment of his burial in a churchyard nearby. The beautiful lady that you see peering out the window is not quite physical. In fact, she is one of the 44 suicides that had taken place in this manor house in London. It seems that numerous people would be obsessed with the idea of committing suicide after entering this home until 1960, when it had to be destroyed. What you're looking at here is called Whitby Abbey. It's on the North Sea, and there are numerous legends connected with these ruins. We've spent many nights with camera and recorder trying to record the ghostly phenomena that we would hear and see. It is said that there are numerous psychic phenomena in regards to vampires. Yes, I said vampires. In fact, It was Bram Stoker who wrote the first book on Dracula, who had his Dracula land right here on the North Sea in these ruins, and used it in the first book that he had ever written on vampires. Well, many nights our small party of adventurers, ghost hunters, would enter these ruins. I would station them all around in different places in 2s and 3s. Usually we have about 18 to 20 people. They have always come back with recordings of ghostly voices or even photographs of ghosts. But imagine, if you can, for a moment, when the fog drifts in off the North Sea, what kind of a feeling you would have sitting there in the dark around 1:30 in the morning, 2 o'clock, waiting for some ghostly apparition to appear. We've done this many times. Many times we have not been disappointed. But of course the full moon is the legendary time of werewolves. Well, you don't believe in werewolves either. All I can say is, come with us some year to England. Let me place you in one of the lonely locations near the ruins with your friend, a partner. Have your thermos of coffee, and when it gets to be around midnight, 1 o'clock, then tell me you don't believe in vampires and werewolves. The chair you see hanging on the wall here is called the Chair of Death. A gentleman by the name of Busby in 1702 had murdered his father-in-law, and for this heinous crime had been put to death by hanging. But what they did was a vigilante type hanging. A group of men had gone to the tavern that you see here, which he owned, had placed him on his favorite chair, this chair, thrown a rope up over one of the beams, and just before the man was put to death, one of the executioners laughingly looked up at him and said, "I'll put that chair to better use after you're gone." He looked down at the men and said, anyone using this chair, his favorite one, would die. Well, the man had taken up that challenge. He had taken the chair. He used it for a couple of days. But the day after, he was kicked to death by his favorite horse. In 1969, an unfortunate wife of one of the owners was cleaning up the attic, found the chair, sat in it and cleaned it up. That very afternoon, going down to the village in her car, she was killed in a terrible crash. Then 6 other people took up the challenge. 4 soldiers from a nearby base, 2 civilians. They also died within 4 days after sitting in that chair. I don't think that I would sit in that chair. I don't know about you. Anyhow, we did go to Thirsk. I had to find out about it. Was this story true? We arrived in Thirsk and found out that the chair had been put in a museum. But before we arrived, about 10 miles from the museum, we had 2 blowouts. Not one blowout, 2 blowouts at the same time. Is that natural? The number of our car, 13. Maybe that was a bad omen in itself. Luckily for us, the young ladies who were following us in their car had a spare that would fit ours, so we were able to get to a garage. The same 2 ladies were almost killed by a tanker truck on the way to the museum. They had just been about to pull out when this huge tanker truck came around a curve. They had plenty of time to see it, but they claimed they did not. Luckily for them, the driver was a professional and was able to turn in time to save their lives. We arrived at the Army base and spoke with some of the soldiers who had told us about the sergeant and the other 3 soldiers who had been killed of unnatural causes. I should say, died of unnatural causes. Since the 4 of them were found, usually in bed. An autopsy had taken place. There was no cause as to why they should have died, but they died. Lorraine, in the meantime, after leaving the museum with ourselves, driving toward Loch Ness, decided to visit with Father Gregory Brucey, one of our dear friends, who was the prior of Loch Ness on St. Benedict's Monastery. Again, tragedy struck. She hemorrhaged so badly we had to race her to a hospital 28 miles away. Fortunately for us, we arrived in time. Was this all due to the, as they call it, the cursed chair? Well, I have a strong feeling that it could have been. Actor John Williams, who you've probably seen in many movies here in the United States, lives about 70 miles from Thirsk. He had said to us that he knew about the chair, that he would never sit in that chair. Well, as I said earlier, I don't think I'd ever sit in that chair. Would you?
That is something, you know that?
Well, you remember that
That really
case?
is something, those cases.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to be there when? Next week.
Next
We'll
week.
be
Next
leaving-
Monday.
Right, we'll be
Yes.
there. When people are watching this, we'll be up in the northern moors of Scotland.
I wish I was going with you.
I wish you would,
really
too.
wish I was going with
Yes,
you.
you and Judy have many times.
So, folks,
Wish.
Write us, send us letters, ask us questions, anything you want to do. P.O. Box 41, Monroe, Connecticut, the Warrens. They're more than happy to listen to you and to your letters and your cases and your questions. They'll be in the Scottish Highlands, but as soon as they get back, they'll answer your questions. So for Lorraine Warren, for Ed Warren, I'm Tony Spera. Good night.